Welcome back to Wartime Cafe on Free Palestine TV. This is episode 20. We are in Riba Cafe restaurant in Al-Wazai in the southern suburb of Beirut, right on the waterfront beside the fishermen's port that was hit during the war by the Zionists a few months ago. We have with us a new guest. He's visiting Lebanon, Dan Kovalik, lawyer, activist, writer, political analyst. Welcome to Beirut. Thank you for being with us on Wartime Cafe.
Thank you for having me, Laith. It's my honor. Thank you.
So, we traditionally start the show with asking about the background of our guest. On one hand, we introduce you to all the audience here
Yes.
in the Western Asia, Arabic world, as well as for all your followers in the West that probably know you from your multiple appearances analyzing the latest news, but maybe don't know about the amazing history that you have that led you to the knowledge and the activism that you do. So let's start from the beginning. Dan, you're from Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Your family, Kovalik, are originally from Slovakia.
Yes. In fact, the Austro-Hungarian Empire at that time. My grandfather came over from there right after World War One. Actually fought in the French Foreign Legion, we found out, and settled in Cleveland, where he was a union baker. And my mom's background, we only know she's English-Irish, but we don't know when her family came.
So how does a Catholic American boy from Pittsburgh end up being so active politically on the facts of American imperialism?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I think a lot of us find our way in life almost by accident. So I was growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio at the time. And when I was 12 years old, Oscar Romero, and I have a medal of him, he's now a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. He was killed in El Salvador in 1980 by, as I found out, I was watching a 60 Minutes episode. I used to go up to my parents' bedroom and watch their little TV, and there was a 60 Minutes episode, and they said he was probably killed by U.S.-backed forces. And I was Catholic, and I was like, I thought the U.S. was protecting the church and protecting Christianity. And this really planted the seed. It didn't immediately radicalize me, but it made me start thinking about the things that I was being taught. I was in a very anti-communist, very right-wing household. My family's very conservative Catholic. And then with that seed planted, when I was 19 years old, I decided to go to Nicaragua. And that was during the Contra War. Went there in 1987. And I lived for a month in Hotait, which is on the Honduran border. At that time, that was a war zone because the Contras were operating from Honduras. And that really tipped the scales. I came back and I was a different person. I went clean shaven. I came home with a beard. In fact, I'll tell you something, Laith, and it's funny, and you'll laugh when I tell you this. So,
we're right beside the airport, so planes are landing because there's a strip right behind us
okay.
there. And during the war, the Israelis were hitting beside this runway multiple times, including the port just beside us here, just to threaten the international airline. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Interruption. Continue.
And by the way, what I understand about Middle East airlines is they're willing to dodge the bombs, right? They don't cancel flights, that sort of thing. So that trip really changed my life. I really immediately realized, oh wow, my country's on the wrong side. We're supporting terror against these very poor people. Kids in rags. And I would go to church every Sunday in Hotait, and I would pray with the people, and I was like, oh, everyone's praying for peace, but peace isn't coming, and everything in my life was just turned upside down. And really, after that point, I decided my main opposition was to U.S. empire. And again, that was in 1987. And I never looked back. And the next year, I went with the Veterans Peace Convoy, again, back to Nicaragua. We drove from the United States to Nicaragua with humanitarian aid. And again, I went with these incredible U.S. veterans like Jerry Condon, Bob Livesey, Raul Valdez. They all fought in Vietnam. And I was very young, in the group because these were, older people. Very dedicated people, though. And again, that trip radicalized me even further. Spending time with those folks and also going from first of all, it took us 2 months to get there. It should only take about 7 days. But the U.S. government, which was sanctioning Nicaragua, would not let us leave the country. So the big thing was not getting in, it was getting out. And in fact, the first time we tried to enter Mexico from the U.S. with this convoy of trucks with humanitarian aid for Nicaragua, the immigration authorities, they stopped us, and the first few cars, which were all the veterans, okay, because they strategically put the veterans in front, the customs officers went and they smashed the windows and threw tear gas into their trucks. And I saw that. I was very close to one of those trucks, and I saw my friend Raul Valdez, with the tear gas and him trying to breathe. And again, these are people who fought for America, and they're being brutalized, In any case, we ended up getting there. We actually sued the U.S. government, sued George Shultz, who was the Secretary of State at the time. We won, actually. So we had the right to leave.
This was the Reagan era.
Yes. We had the right to leave the country, and we drove there. And all along the way, in Mexico, in Guatemala, and Honduras, we had churches and groups that welcomed us. I mean, it was incredible. So when we got to Mexico City, we had this went to church on a Sunday, and the Archbishop, they called him the Red Bishop. And he said, if you were to follow Jesus Christ, you must follow his disciples on earth. Saint Fidel Castro, Saint Daniel Ortega, right? That was incredible.
Yeah. The pure form of Christianity is to care for the sick and to care for the needy and to help the wretched, basically. And the pure, this is why Jesus was known as to be the prophet of peace.
Yeah.
And so clearly those who call themselves Christian while conducting genocides and colonization and abusing people and their nations are the opposite of what Christianity is.
Yes.
So you started with, the Sandinistas, those ragged fighters, actually in the end won against the empire.
They did, which is incredible.
Incredible. Yeah. And we see today, reoccurrences of those barefoot fighters in Yemen and Gaza also defeating the empire as we see it. You got involved after you came back. You decided to also go to law, and you worked with the Steelworkers Union on their cases in Colombia about oil corporations' abuse of labor activists. Tell us about that, because part of American imperialism and hegemony is these corporations that are extracting resources by force from nations. Let's talk about that battle for labor rights and rights of nations like Colombia that are being abused at that time.
Yeah, so, first I was hired to do pretty standard domestic labor law. And by the way, it should be noted, because a lot of people don't know this, that the Steelworkers, which is part of the AFL-CIO, a lot of people have called that the AFL-CIA, because they have this long history of actually working with the CIA and overthrowing leftist governments like Allende in Chile, Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala. And so that was part of, the atmosphere I went into. But the other thing, again, very relative or relevant to what we're doing here, what we're talking about here, is that there was a very strong Zionist ethos in my legal department. So the legal department was, first of all, founded by a guy named Lee Pressman, who was Jewish. Now, he was a communist, great guy. And he helped run guns to the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War through Mexico and all. But he didn't last long. The next guy who took over and who is credited for really founding the legal department that I worked under for 26 years is a guy named Arthur Goldberg. And after he left the Steelworkers, well, he left because he was appointed Supreme Court Justice by John F. Kennedy. And then under Johnson, he was appointed U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. And he was the ambassador in 1967 who ran cover for Israel and really helped solidify their occupation.
Wow, this is a crazy art.
Of the West Bank and Gaza, right? This is crazy, right? I know, it's hard to believe. You couldn't make this stuff up. And that's the legal department I came into. And the guy who hired me was a guy named Bernie Kleiman, who, great guy. I mean, a great guy. I respected him, great labor lawyer. But also, I would call him kind of a soft Zionist. By the way, so his stepson is now a very well-known Zionist, but he was better known as a playwright before. His stepson was a guy named David Mamet, who was a great playwright. He made, I guess his most famous play, which became a film, was Glengarry Glen Ross, yes. Right? And about half the people I worked with were pretty strong Zionists. And all my friends there were pretty strong Zionists. And so, while as a leftist, I had a real sympathy for the Palestinians, I was very influenced by the Zionism that kind of permeated the legal department in which I worked with. I always went to Seder's on Passover, and my wife, my ex-wife, two of her brothers tragically died, and when they did, a friend of mine in the union had trees planted in Israel for them, which I was very moved by, and we can get back to that because I learned what that meant later. Well, I can just tell you what I learned much later was that those trees are planted largely in places where Palestinians had lived and where land was taken over, and it was really
lands that were ethnically cleansed to hide the villages that were destroyed.
And I didn't know that at the time. Again, my path is kind of a long path and maybe a tortuous one. But in any case, the work I did in Colombia came later in my career there, and at my behest, because I was still, my interest in Latin America and anti-imperialism came before I went to law school. Mm-hmm. So what I learned was that Colombia, South America at that time was the most dangerous country in the world to be a trade unionist. Hundreds of union leaders a year were killed in Colombia. No country was even close, and it was being killed in a country armed to the hilt by the United States. As Noam Chomsky pointed out, Israel and Egypt are always the first and second biggest recipients of U.S. military aid. That might have changed with Ukraine, but it's more or less true. The third place changes, and for a while under Clinton it was Turkey because they had to commit genocide against the Kurdish population, so they needed arms. But after Turkey it was Colombia. And again, from about 2000 to 2009 or so was the high watermark of the death squad activity in Colombia that the U.S. was funding, killing human rights leaders, Catholic priests. 80 Catholic priests were killed in Colombia from 1984 to like 2011, and 2 bishops. 80. Can you imagine? It's got no publicity. And again, about 4,000 trade union leaders.
It's interesting that you brought up Israel there, because the current president of Colombia.
Yeah, Gustavo Petro, a friend of mine, by the way, who I met in the course of these cases, yes.
So he had made a comment during the genocide in Gaza when the Israelis were criticizing the positions of Colombia against the genocide, and told the Israelis to shut up because they were responsible for arming the genocide in Colombia.
Yes.
And said maybe he will also take them to court for that. So the American and Israeli hands in the war and genocide in Colombia and the killings of these labor unionists and others is definitely very deep.
Yes, and if I could mention, can I mention my book, because
Yes.
I do discuss it in this book a bit.
You have 8 books already, and this is the latest. This is the edition that the copy that you gave me as a gift. The Case for Palestine. It just came out this year.
May of last year.
Yes, you do mention. You said the situation in Colombia there.
Yes, because why? Because I have a whole chapter on Israel's role of being the essentially actor to do the dirty work that often the U.S. decides they don't want to do anymore. And so I give us several examples of this. One, probably the most, I think, enigmatic is that of Argentina. In the late 70s to mid 80s, they had a fascist junta. In fact, you could say it was a neo-Nazi junta. And in fact, they were killing Jews. They killed more Jews proportionally in Argentina than anyone else. And the U.S. was giving them a certain amount of support during that time, but it was hard to give it direct support given how terrible they were. So who comes in? Israel, to give a lot of support to Argentina, even though they were killing Jews, even though they were neo-Nazi. And Israel would play this role throughout the world in countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, and yes, Colombia. So Carlos Castaño, who was the head of the AUC death squads, the AUC paramilitaries, who under his leadership killed tens of thousands of people. Again, labor leaders, indigenous leaders, human rights leaders, Catholic priests. He wrote an autobiography, and he said he owed his career and his country to Israel. Israel trained him in Israel, supplied the death squads with arms, and again, to carry out these crimes. They did the same in Guatemala. They did the same in South Africa. Israel was the last country in the world to continue supporting the apartheid state of South Africa. And why do I point those things out? Because it shows, Israel can say, oh, they're a democracy. They're defending Western civilization, which Netanyahu says all the time. They are the light, fighting the darkness. No, in fact, they've always defended the darkness against the light. They've always been reactionary. And so, again, that's how it relates to the work I did in Colombia, where we sued companies like Coca-Cola for supporting death squads in Colombia. So in any case. But as I said, throughout that period, I worked with many Zionists, some kind of soft Zionists, some hard Zionists. One guy I worked with, a guy named Mel Stein. His daughter was, raised in a great suburb of Pittsburgh called Squirrel Hill. But she ended up being a settler in the West Bank with a machine gun. So what really changed my view on that, and again, that made me not just merely sympathetic to the Palestinians, but full on side of the Palestinians, was that in 2012 I started to teach international human rights law at the University of Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Yeah, School of Law. And it just happened that almost every year I had a Palestinian student in my class, a foreign exchange student who was getting money from the Open Society Institute of Soros, and who would study in my class. And one of the first ones I had was a guy named Khalil al-Wazir, and his uncle was the famous Khalil al-Wazir with the PFLP.
And he was assassinated, obviously.
In, I think, 1982, yes. And Khalil would sit in front of my class, and I was, pretty leftist and anti-imperialist. He would sit in the front of my class just smiling, grinning. He just loved my class. But it wasn't that expressive in my class, because he told me later, as a Palestinian, he didn't really want to be open about his feelings, because he figured everyone would assume he had his views because he was Palestinian.
Yeah.
He was kind of, But he told me something that blew my mind. It was, again, you just learn things as you go on in life. And he told me, as the semester was ending, I said, "Oh, how are you going to go home to Gaza? You're living in Gaza." He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to go." And he told me how he was going to go home. And this blew my mind. He said, "Well, I will fly to Egypt, to Cairo. I will inevitably be arrested."
Because of his name, number one, beyond the Palestinian,
right.
Yes.
And I'll be jailed for a few days to several days. And then they'll send me through the tunnels back into Gaza. And I was like, wait, what? That's how you get home. Yeah. You're not going to fly home to Gaza. You're not going to... Are you kidding me? This is what... And I just was... And I also thought to myself, how did I not know this was a thing? And then
I took international law and international relations courses during my university years, and I was one of those, taking those courses, not because I didn't know the knowledge that I was going to take, but mainly to challenge the rest of the class to learn more. And obviously, anybody now today, from just TikTok and X, can understand that there's no such thing as international law.
Yeah.
That is ink on paper, and if I wasn't challenging the teacher in the classes at the University of Concordia, he wouldn't have admitted the basics, which is that international law is de facto, not de jure. Meaning what you can bring to fact is what is international law,
right.
Which means you need force.
You need force.
To do so. And therefore, international law doesn't exist if you don't have force. And this is what now everybody that, without taking international law classes at university, understood from what happened with the genocide in Gaza. International law doesn't exist because there's no force to implement it against the Zionist colony. So, Palestine and the genocide in Gaza today, which we just saw the beginnings of the ceasefire this week, have brought us back to the moments between World War I and World War II, when there was no international law existing.
Right, between the League of Nations and the United Nations, yes.
And so, as an American, which yesterday the new emperor
the unabashed emperor.
Yes, yeah. And said he's going to be taking Panama. Panama used to be part of Colombia.
Yes, of course.
Which was chopped off by the Americans.
By Teddy Roosevelt, yes. In 1903, yes. Thank you. Yeah. And by the way, Gustavo Petro, when he was a senator, and I've known him since he was a senator, he said something very interesting. He said that the violence in Colombia The Civil War, the seeds of it began in 1903 with the U.S. supporting the insurgent groups against Colombia to cut Panama off. So that he said the seeds went back that long, but it was the U.S. Mm-hmm. It was the U.S. that really began this extreme violence that would come to haunt Colombia for a century or so, which is pretty interesting. And as you say, now the emperor's threatening to take Panama back, even though Jimmy Carter had agreed to give it back to Panama in 1999. And of course, thank you, shukran. Nicaragua's now trying to build a canal. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. has coveted the possibility of a canal there dating back to Thomas Jefferson. And so we'll see what we do with Nicaragua. So the empire, yes, continues to covet these, all these countries for their natural resources, cheap labor, etc.
So you may be back to your first passion,
yes,
in terms of dealing with Central America and South America, because the gaze of the emperor seems to be now focused on south of the border.
Yes, like Moldor, if we're doing a Lord of the Rings analogy. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, looking at the prospects of already he signed these, presidential decrees deploying the military to the border with Mexico, declaring the cartels as terrorist organizations, which authorizes the use of military force, and the 20 million quote-unquote illegals that he wants to deport, and activating the 1798 Act that allows them to deport people without trial. So the next few months, what do you feel these signals give us as predictions?
Yeah, well, it's very mixed. I mean, the problem with Trump, of course, is that he's very unpredictable. I think he's a man of impulse. And he'll get interested in something and then not be interested in it. But first of all, we have to acknowledge that he has, or believes he has, almost absolute power. And of course, as Lord Acton had said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think he seems with this inauguration to be intoxicated with this sense that he has almost omnipotence over the world, right? In a way even the pharaohs didn't feel, right? So, it's going to be mixed. First of all, I guess we have to acknowledge that the ceasefire in Gaza came about through him, right? Or, I mean, not only, obviously the resistance was critical, right? But apparently he put some pressure on Israel to agree to the ceasefire in a way that Biden did not. And the ceasefire may not last, we know that, right? It may be Netanyahu signaling that he may end it as soon as the hostages are back and all that. But we have to acknowledge that that's, at least to the extent the ceasefire lasts, that's a positive thing he did. Though again, it's mixed because in the West Bank now, Israel's engaged in these pogroms, and they let 90 people go only to arrest 60 more in the West Bank, right? And the other thing Trump did, while he might have pushed for the ceasefire, he also reversed Biden on sanctioning these West Bank settlers, Israeli settlers. So even in that theater, he's giving mixed signals. So I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge he's giving incredibly mixed signals.
It seems like it's Machiavellian almost.
Yes, Machiavellian. And again, I think, to put it very bluntly, he gets a thrill from exerting power. I think he enjoys pushing a guy like Netanyahu around, and all of us agree that's a guy who should be pushed around, right? But it may not be for the best motives as well. And then the question is, what's he going to do in Ukraine? Again, very mixed what he's saying. You know, on the one hand, he says, I'm going to end it in 24 hours. On the other hand, he suggests he's going to give more aid to Ukraine in order to put more pressure on Russia to get a good deal. He says he's going to meet with Putin, Xi Jinping. So look, in the end, we don't know exactly what is in the mind of Trump. And maybe in a sense, it's not that relevant to what we need to do. And that is that we need to keep pushing, right? Even though we have a ceasefire in Gaza, that struggle's not over. We cannot stop our vigilance, right? I think the peace movement, in a way, wants to take a breath, take a break, you know, but the truth is that war is going to continue. It'll probably continue in Gaza, sadly. But I think regardless if it does, it's going to continue in the West Bank. It's going to continue in Syria, where Israel continues to take land. Apparently, they're moving closer and closer to Damascus.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's like around 12 kilometers outside the city.
Right.
They're very close to the main highway.
And they're building a military base now. Yeah.
Military bases there. Before we jump to the region here,
Yes.
I just want to, ask one last question specifically about the U.S. Obviously, the election of Trump, a huge part of it was the people that didn't want to vote to Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. Good Freudian slip.
Yeah,
Yes.
the black version of Hillary Clinton, or the Indian version of Hillary Clinton. Which
Right.
one is it, as Trump would say? But also because of the genocide. And now Trump is in power. What's going to happen to the movement that was growing during the genocide in
Right.
Gaza? And because things are going to get more desperate, more with probably war on the border with Mexico, is there hope of any radicalization on the levels of the 70s that, in the American populace?
Well, so first of all, I would say, I hope there could be that. Practically speaking, though, here's the problem, and it's kind of a double bank shot that the ruling class has done. So first of all, those who would be, I think, inherently anti-war and would come to the streets to protest war are the base of the Democratic Party. But I think certainly since Obama, they have been groomed to accept war, right? To accept bombings, to accept wars like the one in Libya that he waged, or Yemen, right? And also they've hated Trump so much that largely they were unwilling to take on even Biden for the genocide in Gaza. I mean, some were, but not the huge majority of that base. So the question is, will they mobilize against Trump for doing the same things? That's going to be a huge question. I would think that's where there could be some organizational, fertility. But again, they seem to have moved past or away from those issues of war and peace, and they're more obsessed with social issues, right? Abortion, LGBT rights, etc. And again, after Obama, much less interested in war. And that brings us to the base of the Trump base, who did support Trump because he seemed to be against war, because they're tired of their money going to war when their basic needs are not being met. But I don't think those people will protest Trump. If he decides to go to war somewhere, or to continue a war, I don't see them hitting the streets against it. I'm just telling you. I mean, I could be surprised. Obviously, as a peace activist, we need to try to woo those people to do that. But I don't necessarily see it. So then the question is, well, who's left then? And what's left are, kind of, the more harder core left, which is very tiny in America. And then communities affected by the wars, Arabic communities, Palestinian communities. So, I mean, in short, I must say, I'm not that hopeful of a major anti-war movement.
So let's say he does actually focus his wrath on Latin America.
Right. Let's say he invades Venezuela. Right.
Let's say he invades Mexico or starts a war with Mexico or invades Panama.
Yeah.
That affects now a larger portion of the population of the U.S. as a Latino community. Is there hopes with that radicalization?
There is some. Okay, and so we should say that in the 1980s, there was a large solidarity, movement in support of Central America because of Reagan's war against Central America. And a lot of Latinos in the U.S. were part of that, right? But, you see that a large segment of the Latino community voted for Trump, and I don't think because they oppose war. I think it's more that they saw their economic interest aligned with him, and frankly, even may have been anti-immigrant. A lot of immigrants come and they establish themselves and they want to pull the rope up, right? Certainly that's what a lot of white people do, I mean, so, let's assume we invade Mexico. Will Chicanos in the U.S. rise up against that? Maybe, but I guess I'm not feeling it. I don't know how much, If several years ago, I would have told you the ability of the U.S. to invade Latin America again was so small because there would be no popular support for that. But Donald Trump has seemed to tap into something where people very well might support that. The anti-immigration focus, which a lot of people support, again, even Latinos.
I mean, the people around him are comfortable enough now to do Nazi salutes, as we saw.
That was was that incredible? I mean, really, that was outrageous. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
So this is the effect of being able to conduct genocide out in the open and getting away with it. I mean, for sure, the Christian and or secular white supremacists were like, why only Jewish white supremacists can get that right? I have the right also to now genocide and colonize and expand my territory. And that's what we saw in the speech, really, of Trump mentioning those things. America is going to be great again, manifest destiny situation. We're the greatest. We're going to expand our territory. And speaking about expanding territory, we go back to Israel expanding its territory into Syria, occupation of more lands. The United States is still occupying a third of Syria.
Yes.
Looting its gas and oil and wheat. And Turkey is now expanding also its occupation. You want to go to Syria next. It's
in the next couple of days, yes, maybe, yes.
And this would be your second or third visit to Syria?
Third visit. I was there twice in 2021. And let me just say again, what I saw there was another kind of thing that really kind of moved me in a different direction. The big thing, I went to Malula, which is a Christian town that speaks Aramaic. One of the most beautiful towns I've ever seen.
It has the oldest church in the world.
Yes.
And by the way, the Wahhabi death squads, HTS, at gunpoint cleared Malula and the churches of Malula and the nuns of Malula and marched them to the border with Lebanon. They are in Lebanon now.
Is that right?
It's
As
been
we
ethnically
speak.
cleansed. It's been ethnically cleansed. Malula and the whole region around it that speaks Aramaic, all the churches ethnically cleansed.
Honestly, I did not know that. You kind of blow my mind. I know some people who did move from Malula to here, but I didn't realize it was that extensive. When I was there in 2021, I heard the stories of the nuns and the stories of Christians there who said that they tried to do that in 2013, and it was the Syrian army and Hezbollah that defended the town. And that kind of blew my mind, you know. Again, I was kind of sympathetic to Hezbollah, but it shocked me, I'll be honest, that Hezbollah was defending Christians there. And then I went to Homs. I went to this church called the Church of the Holy Girdle of Mary, and they claim to have a belt that the Virgin Mary wore. And again, the Free Syrian Army that the U.S. and the West were supporting went in. They tried to burn down that church, one of the oldest churches in the world. It was founded in 69 A.D. Again, it was Hezbollah that came in to protect that church. And I was like, what's this Muslim group doing to come, supporting Christians? So that was another turning point in my mind to really support the resistance, I guess, to cut to the chase. So yeah, I do know that now, of course, HTS, which is basically Al-Qaeda, right? The same people who were doing this in Malula and Homs have come to power, and they're persecuting Christians and Shia and Alawites and Druze. That's the type of thing, honestly, I want to go to Syria and to document. And again, we're doing this in real time. And I did not know what you just told me, that those nuns who I visited there are now in Lebanon. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Do you know what town? Are they in Baalbek or where are they?
As far as I can tell, the churches here in Lebanon are hiding them.
Okay.
And they're not letting them talk to the media, obviously. So it's a tragic situation because they can't even tell us what happened to the public, because the churches are so scared of retribution against them in the rest of Syria and or inside Lebanon here by HTS if these nuns speak out about the crimes that they have to live through. It's a very sad situation, and even the majority of the Muslim Sunnis in Syria belong to the
Sufis?
Sufi sects, the mystics, basically. So they're also under persecution. So it's not only what we would call minorities that are suffering. Everybody is now suffering under this Wahhabi cult being exported by the Saudis, the CIA, and the Mossad into Syria by force.
Yeah.
Last time you were there, what did you see, and what do you expect to see that's going to be different now?
Well, again, at least when I was there, I saw those groups intact. I saw the Christian groups in Malula and Homs intact. And while it wasn't perfect, because of course the country was under horrible sanctions, so they only had electricity like 2 hours a day. So and they knew when their electricity would be on. So when they had to cook, they'd go quickly cook, or do their laundry, and it wasn't easy, but still, at least there was a sense of national unity, and the minorities were protected, and I think that I expect to see that has been broken up. That the country of Syria as we knew it is gone. And that those minority groups, sizable minority groups, have either fled or are living underground, right? I have friends in Syria who told me their life is over. They don't go outside, they don't work, they hide in their house. So those are the people I would like to talk to. Again, we'll see if that's even possible. So, there's a lot of barriers to what I would like to do, but I think that is a story that needs to be told.
And obviously Syria in the Western, even quote-unquote progressive circles, was one of the touchiest issues even before now.
Yes.
You had all these what I would call leftovers that bought the whole charade and supported the terrorists against the Syrian government, and now we see them totally silent.
Right.
How hard was it trying to convince people in the progressive circles about Syria, and what do you think would be the intake now differently about the information that you may relay to the public in the West when you go back?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that I think trying to educate people about Syria was about one of the hardest things you could do in the U.S., even amongst the left, for the reasons you say. There was a strong strain amongst the left that was so anti-Assad that they either, supported U.S. intervention openly or at least objectively. And even in the pro-Palestinian movement, as of late, there were folks a lot of Syrians in the diaspora who would intermingle the, pro-Palestinian chants and marches with, free Syria and free Iran and all this stuff, which helped divide the movement a bit. But the question is, what are those people now in the diaspora? What do they think about Syria? Could they possibly be happy with what's happening there? If they were truly pro-Palestinian, and frankly, if they were truly patriotic Syrians, could they possibly be happy with the fact that Syria is now being carved up by Turkey and Israel and the United States? And again, that these minorities are being oppressed. I would like to think they couldn't support that. And if they did, it would make me wonder if they were not, in fact, some sort of operatives or whatever. So we'll see. I would hope they would be more open to discussing those things. And because my own view is, if you're pro-Palestinian, how could you be anti-resistance, anti-Hezbollah, anti-Syria under Assad? Again, even if you don't like Assad as a person or what, I mean, his country was supporting the resistance, was supporting Palestine, was supporting Hezbollah. How can you support the Palestinians and not support their friends? And that's a huge question that people need to reckon with. And maybe that question is now being sharpened with what's truly happening in Syria right now.
Yeah, well, with the removal of President Assad, you basically also removed the excuse that any of these delusional people had of their objection to supporting Syria as a country. And now they're looking, and it's easier probably right now to move them away from support for al-Qaeda and these head choppers in the country. So I hope that works out, that people can learn a lesson at least from that. Obviously, it's a little bit late for us as Syrians. The country's destroyed.
Yeah.
So you also visited Russia and Ukraine, the
Yes.
front lines. Let's talk about that in connection to what's happening here, in connection to what's going to happen in Mexico or the Latin America. Which front is the emperor going to decide to pull out from and stay focused on? Do you think Ukraine is going to end this war there?
Well, that's a huge question. I think that there's certainly a good chance it could end, largely because Russia has won the war, right? Because, I mean, I just think reality will assert itself. Unless the U.S. and NATO want a full-scale war against Russia, which up to now they haven't wanted. They've wanted a proxy war, right? They haven't wanted to waste their own blood in Ukraine against Russia. Their treasure, yes. Unless they're willing to do that, I don't see how the war doesn't end soon, because Russia will win. They Ukraine has been defeated. They're now having to recruit 18-year-olds off the street to fight. Um, so, in a way, I'm hopeful that will end. And if it doesn't, again, I think it means that the West has decided to fight Russia, directly. And that could lead to nuclear war. And, the one thing I thought about Trump was that he did not want that. Biden, or the administration of Biden, because we don't know if Biden was running the show, seemed to be willing to risk that. Trump has suggested he is not willing to do that. The one bright spot I thought in the debate he had with Harris was that he raised the specter of nuclear war. And he made it clear he was against that. So I'd like to think he would try to avoid that. But we just live in uncharted territories, But let's assume that will get resolved somehow. I guess I'm going to say for now, I think it probably will get resolved. That leaves West Asia. And that's where he's more, bellicose. I think he is willing to do much more aggressive things here. In the West Bank, probably in Gaza. He talked about, reading through the lines, it sounds like he's ready to build the next Trump, hotel and casinos in Gaza City. And certainly his son-in-law Kirchner has been, I guess, doing investments, which suggests that as well. I'm going to predict this is still going to be the flashpoint. Where we're sitting right now is going to be the flashpoint. We know Israel's still bombing southern Lebanon. It has not left southern Lebanon. They're now, again, closing off with the West Bank. They're making further inroads into Syria. This is going to be, sadly, I think where the conflict will continue and probably escalate.
All of that talk about Mexico and so forth was just a distraction, and he's going to try to surprise everybody. This Kiwi doesn't want to go back.
Yes.
We're not artists.
Right, we're not in art, right.
Yeah, like the people that made this play for us.
Yes, I think that, right. I don't think we're going to invade Mexico. Could we invade Venezuela? Possibly. I do think that's within the realm of possibility. But I think...
And he just put Cuba back
on the terrorist
state list.
Which, by the way, Biden was so cynical to take them off less than a week before the inauguration. He knew darn well Trump would just put them back. I'm sure the ink wasn't even dry on his reversal before Trump came into office, right? So look, I think they're going to muck around in Cuba and Venezuela, Nicaragua, as they always do. But again, I think this is where it's going to happen in West Asia. I think this is where the battle's going to happen. Egypt could be brought in. Israel's threatening Egypt. Jordan could become a hot spot. This is it. This is where it's happening.
Well, although I love my Latin brothers and sisters and the revolutionaries, I was hoping for a reprieve for us here. The bloodbath has been stopped for at least 30 years now, continuously since the first Iraq War. We were hoping to have some reprieve, and obviously it's going to continue, as you're saying. We wish you best of luck in your visit in Syria.
Thank you.
Safety, and when you come back, let's talk more about your experience there and the things that you learned. Thank you very much, Dan Kovalik, for being with us. His latest book, The Case for Palestine, you can get it online, and you can visit Dan's own website and follow him on all the social media. Until we meet next time, this is Free Palestine TV, Wartime Cafe. We were in Riba Cafe restaurant on the front of the water in Beirut. I bid you all a free Palestine.